Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April event of the Blake Society. This evening's monthly event is a little experimental in that what we're going to do is discuss with your participation an aspect of Blake which is inherently interesting and fascinating. The topic of this evening is the frontispiece and Blake's particular use of the frontispiece. The frontispiece is long established, and it was essentially an image that came before the title page of a book predominantly of text. So the fascination comes that Blake, who was a maker of illuminated books, how did he approach the use of an image as a frontispiece? How did he reinvent it, distress it, change it? So that is the nature of tonight's discussion. And just as we begin, perhaps it might be useful to have a very brief look at what the audience of Blake's contemporaries expected of a frontispiece. So if I might invite Ian Frampton, our technical guru for this evening, to begin to share some images. Here we have the Great Bible of 1539. The Great Bible, as you probably all know, was commissioned in the reign of Henry VIII, and it was a project of Thomas Cromwell, so that every church in England should have a copy of the translation of the Bible into English. And here we have the frontispiece. It uses the pre-Renaissance perspective and is essentially an image with a small amount of text dropped in. We might have the next image, Ian. Here we have the very famous First Folio, which combines a portrait of Shakespeare with the essential text and date and place of publication. So it's not particularly radical, but it's very informative. And the next slide. Here we have an artist, Albrecht Dürer. As an artist, he's playing more with the idea of the frontispiece. And this, from 1497, was the frontispiece to an edition of St. Jerome's letters. And it tells very much a story about St. Jerome. You see the free Bibles in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. You get a glimpse into the working conditions, the bedroom, the kitchen utensils, the view out the window. It's a fascinating, nosy insight into the life of St. Jerome with the classic image of the lion and the thorn. So this is an artist's approach, albeit several hundred years before, of how the frontispiece might work. And the next slide. Here, of course, is how the frontispiece complemented the title page. And this is Robinson Crusoe from 1719. An exciting image and the essential information and title page. So these are the sorts of images that Blake's audience were expecting. One more slide. Blake was an artist, very much like Dürer. And here is the image that Dürer used for a collection of devotional plates. From 1511, it was the small passion. I think there were 36 devotional plates, but it still required a frontispiece. And here we have the image that Dürer used, which I'm sure Blake would have loved if he'd seen it, and perhaps he had seen it. And the next slide. This is a very conventional plate, frontispiece. It's The Botanic Garden by Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, and it was a very important book in Blake's day, published by Joseph Johnson, and Blake, as we'll discover later, was involved in some of the engravings, but the overall design was by Fuseli. So this is a very conventional frontispiece, contemporary to Blake. And one more. And here is a very contemporary frontispiece that Blake was engaged in. Blake is the engraver of William Cooper after the portrait by George Romney. So Blake was not only familiar, but he exercised the skill that the contemporary audience expected. So that is a very quick overview of what the frontispiece meant and was expected to be in Blake's time. Before we move on, I'm going to invite Ian Frampton, who's the technical specialist of the night, just to talk a little bit about how the discussion will work on Zoom.
Thanks, Tim, and good evening all. This is a strange situation for me to be in. As the technical assistant, I'm usually off screen and in the background, just making sure that everything's working okay. But we thought, given this different format for the discussion this evening, that it'd be helpful just to have a think together about how we might want to run it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you now to start your video. And if you'd like to start your video, please do. You don't have to, but it'd be nice to see who's in the room. So please do, if you feel able to, and you'd like to start your video. And here come the people. Good evening all. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now what you should see is you're still seeing the image of William Cooper. And alongside that, you should be seeing me and or a longer stream of thumbnails. You can control that in the top right hand corner of your screen. There should be a button marked view, and you can select either, so you can select side by side speaker view or side by side gallery view. And if you select side by side gallery view, you should be able to see a thumbnail set of participants, probably not everybody, but you should be able to scroll up and down that and see who else is in the room. You should also see a vertical bar that separates the thumbnail video images from the William Cooper image, and you can slide that vertical bar left to right, and as you do that, you'll see you'll change the amount of screen space that's taken up with the image of William Cooper and the amount of screen space that's given to the thumbnails of the participants. If you're on an iPad or a phone, all those things will be different. Apologies. Hopefully, if you are on any of those devices, you're familiar with how they work on Zoom. The next thing that we're going to think about is how, when we're in the discussion, if you want to contribute to the discussion, the simplest way to do that is to raise your hand using the Zoom function. If you raise your hand physically, we might not spot you. But if you raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand function, then you'll pop up to the top of the list and I'll be able to spotlight you. So again, those of you who are on Mac or PC interfaces, you should have a raise hand option. Sometimes if there isn't a raise hand button, you have to click on participants and then you'll see a button that enables you to raise your hand. If you're on a phone or an iPad, it's under the more options. If none of those things work, then the next option would be to put a comment into the chat. So let me now enable you to chat. That's great. So the chat has been enabled. So as we get into the discussion, please do put comments into the chat or let me know that you want to participate and we'll work you in that way. So without further ado, let me hand over to the co-host along with Tim for this evening, and that's Stephen Pritchard. So Stephen, if you'd like to take over at this point and introduce the idea of the frontispiece in Blake, and we can get the discussion going. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ian, and good evening, everyone. course, Blake got into some trouble, as many of you will know, for this particular engraving of William Cooper, in trouble at first with Cooper's cousin, Lady Hesketh, who thought that Cooper looked a little crazy. And of course, he had enormous mental health issues, but she came to like the picture. We need to move back with the images there, Ian. Thank you. I remember having a Blake frontispiece on my teenage bedroom when I was 15. And I bought it from Athena Posters, who were very much the market leaders. And it was the frontispiece to Europe, which we'll be looking at. And I painted the rest of my teenage bedroom orange and black to complement the picture. Pictures by Blake at that point were much harder to come by than they are now with the wonders of the Blake archive. I went up to Hull. I had a girlfriend up there and got the use of their university library before I started 4 years of Blake studies. And they had Jerusalem by the Trianon Press. And I had to ask especially to see this. I had to be observed by someone who was making sure that I didn't deface or steal it. And the book itself was a facsimile, but incredibly expensive at that time. And I remember as I turned the pages, some of them were coming slightly loose. And eventually one actually came away in my hand. And at that point, I shut the book and left. Now these images are so much more available. And in those days, back in the 70s, the emphasis was very much on the text. And since then, we've started to consider Blake so much more in terms of the extraordinary images for themselves and in relation to the text. The way that we thought this might work is I'm going to show you first up the frontispiece in each case, and then the frontispiece with the title page. And we thought we would leave the frontispiece up, and then if you want to just have a look at it, raise your hands when you're ready, and just offer any thoughts about it. And all responses are valid and welcome. You can just talk about how it makes you feel. You can talk about what it says to you, what it means, or anything that you happen to know about it. And then we should be able to get into a dialogue and discussion concerning that. So I thought if we see the frontispiece first in isolation, this is from Visions of the Daughters of Albion from 1793. And we'll just look at it in isolation. And then, as I say, just raise your hands and offer any comments that come to you concerning this image. And we'll take it from there. And Ramazan has his hand up.
As it's written on the site, you told us to pick our favorite, and I picked this as my favorite for this. That's why I'm going to comment on it. This is one of the frontispieces that affect me the most, fascinate me the most, because of the idea of the judgmental God, the eye of the judgmental God outside to be inside the mind. So what we are looking here is a cave, which is the skull, basically. And the sun, the image of the sun, is the eye of a judgmental God. It is very judgmental. But what we see is the eye looking outside, trying to see inside, if it makes sense. And it's all in the mind of Theotormon. And we can see the mind-forged manacles on Bromion and Uthun. That's what fascinates me in this frontispiece, especially.
It's one of my very favorites too, Ramazan. It is just beautiful, isn't it? And of course, as with all of the ones that we're looking at, there's various color versions, but I think this is my very favorite. Eric Nicholson, hello. Eric, you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Just a question for Ramazan. I didn't quite hear the beginning of what you were saying. Did you say there's a skull portrayed in this paint? this image?
I believe the cave to be the skull, the inside of the skull, because Blake says we can see through the chinks in our cavern. So the cavern or the cave image is usually the skull or the head in Blake's ideology, I guess.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Right, thank you. That was the only query. But yes, I like this one as well. And of course, he coloured each print. No two prints were ever the same colouring, were they? He did different versions and coloured different prints with different colours.
Absolutely, and each one has a different impact as a result, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Philip, you have to unmute yourself, Philip.
Thanks for reminding me. I'm wondering what painterly techniques Blake used in this particular image. I know that he did experiment with all kinds of processes, and some of which weren't very successful, but this is so kind of vividly coloured. I'm wondering, is it watercolour? Is it ink? Is it maybe oil? I don't know, wax?
Is there anyone present with detailed knowledge of the processes? So I'm trying to stay out of it as much as I can, and also I have patchy knowledge because there's so much in Blake. Ramazan.
I believe most of them are watercolors, but I think this is what he calls the fresco, right? What he later on termed fresco. I'm not really sure how the technique works.
Yeah.
It's mainly watercolor, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean that in some people's estimation, one of the great things that Blake did was to attempt to open up the process of art making and mass media, if you like, multiple images of something through experimenting with, printing techniques and so on. So I just wondered. I like very much, Ramazan, your comments on it. It had never occurred to me before about this eye. Well, that's so glaringly obvious now.
John, hi.
Hello. I'm not by any means an expert either, but I think it probably is watercolor mainly. But I know that he did, as he went on, experiment with putting more than one color of ink onto the plate as well. So there might be some of that going on here as well. I don't know whether he was doing that yet when he was doing this one. The other thing I just wanted to say was this probably goes for most of the frontispieces we're going to look at, but just in comparison to the non-Blake and indeed the Cooper picture, the frontispiece we saw, how completely, for want of a more historically accurate term, sort of psychedelic this looks. I don't know whether someone else might be able to tell us whether it was normal for some other frontispieces from more sort of normal books to be hand colored in certain editions, but just the color and the kind of bizarreness of what we're looking at even now seems pretty odd. So compared to what people were perhaps used to looking at, it must have blown their brains out and confused them probably.
I think there's an incredible modernity about Blake, John, isn't there? And my students, I used to have my room covered with Blake pictures, and none of them dated Blake later than the 1970s.
Yeah.
And that conjunction of text and images as well. It's quite extraordinary.
Perhaps particularly with this one, there's a sort of prog rock album cover feel to it.
Absolutely, Bromian and the bad people. Yeah. The cave thing that Ramazan referred to has, I think, been quite much examined, and it's a sort of, people see it as a left profile, so the figure, but you could see it various ways, and I think that's part of the beauty of these images. A left profile with the top of the skull almost with a suggestion of hair, and then some see the lower figures as providing the jawline. to the skull. As Ramazan pointed out, we're like in the cave looking out and through it. And the scene we're in is the seashore. It's very liminal. It's a threshold. And I think we'll see that a lot with the frontispiece, which is in some senses the threshold to the work. It's the gateway. Peter Dodd, a very learned man. You're muted, Peter. Unmute.
Being muted is a most unusual condition, but however, we've disposed of that. Wonderful picture to start off with.
You're still muted.
I've done myself again, that's it.
Yeah.
The taste of this particular picture, as with many of the others, opens the perceptions to Blake's view of an emotional explosion through the use of the cave, which Ramazan spoke of, but also the baleful eye of God looking at man and the situation we're in. We have lowering clouds, we have dreadful colors, we have the feeling and sense and tension of doom, disaster, and something shocking about to happen. The hair raised, it's just a wonderful emotional opening of Blake to his text. So a great beginning to this.
Yes, we're looking at that Eurasianic limitation of the senses. And Ramazan referred to the caverned man, which occurs more than once in Blake. And of course, the marriage of heaven and hell deals with it. There's something else about the eyes that I think Robert Essick points out, which is the figure on the left, Bromian. His eyes are really wide open, and he stares with enormous fear off stage, as it were. And then Uthun in the middle, her eyes are half open and her head bowed in dejection. And Theotormon, whose name may mean tormented by God, which would be suitable for Peter's comment about Urizen and the baleful eye, he's completely closed down, completely closed up, with absolutely no eyes apparent at all. So there's a real movement, and we're directed to the eyes of the characters as well as the eye in the sky, which is quite extraordinary. Tim.
Just to follow on John's point, if you have an illuminated book where every page is illuminated, it's akin to the modern graphic novel. And so you really need a strong image on the front. And this is one way that Blake's influence manifests today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned graphic novel, because that's really the way I see Blake. I know that sometimes in the early 70s, when I too started reading Blake and so on, you couldn't really get to see many images. But when I did, I was shocked. I thought how crude some of them were. I read them slightly more differently now, quite a lot differently. But I mean, they are very much of the time. They're very posed, you know, they're like, I imagine, theatrical. I imagine like some of the theatre in Regency England was, with people adopting poses and exaggerating their expressions.
Absolutely. That's great, Philip. Andy, you have your hand up.
Yes. Continue with this idea of like the graphic novel. Of course, in a graphic novel, the images are all related, one after the other. And one of the things that Blake sometimes does is, of course, his images often relate one to the other. But one of the things that he sometimes does is, you know, bring a story full circle by having the front piece and the end piece refer to one another. And I was thinking that might be the case here, where Bromion obviously is looking off to the left, really quite horrified. And as Peter said, overall, it's an image of doom, you know, overhanging doom, and which are all under the weight of this doom. But Bromion, as I say, is staring off, horrified to his left. And if you take this image and put it, I believe, next to, I think, the final image of the book, what he would be looking at to the left is an image really of Uthon rising, being chased by Urizen for all that. But nevertheless, you know, a picture at the end that isn't as gloomy as the picture at the beginning. And that's possibly what is horrifying Bromion in this particular image. But I did have a question for everyone, is that just relates to the story of the book, really, which is how comes it's Bromion, the rapist, and the aggressor, who seems to be in chains there?
Ramazan.
I think they are, Bromion and Uthun are shackled here by the understanding of the society or moral codes, and Theothormon here as well. He suffers because of the conventional moral codes, and especially Uthun suffers from this, of course. But Bromion does the act because of these moral codes, and that's why he is shackled. That's what I believe. I'm not really sure, but
You're saying, in a sense, they're both victims, Ramazan.
yes,
Moral code.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like brothels are made of the stones of religion, and a marriage of heaven and hell. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And Uthun is condemned as part of this process as well, isn't she? And so they're both prisoners in that sense of society and the way it's configured in terms of the ideology. Peter.
My take on that is that Bromion has turned his back on his past, and his broken past is behind him, and he's looking at his future, which is in the distance, which shows nothing promising, and he is in his personal hell. He's committed his crime is behind him. Now, what does he look at? He's looking at the most dreadful future. And I was fortunate in as much as my grandmother, when I was a very small boy, had a book of Blake prints. It may even have been, they may even have been originals. I don't know. I was very young, and she would talk me through them. And I was fortunate to be exposed to the images a long while before I was exposed to the text. And the emotional shock and the injection of real emotions into a small boy, maybe I was 6, 7, or 8 or something. It came together later, but the images spoke to me as a child, rather as the comic novel spoke to me when I was a small boy too, that I could pick up on that. The text came later. The text was less important. Thank you.
Tim.
Just before we move on to the next image, just a very tiny comment that God needs 2 eyes. So where is the second eye? And of course, the second eye is the link, the giant link of the chain underneath Bromion.
Very nice. It occurred to me earlier today, as just a passing thought, we know that Blake was very aware of Shakespeare, and Theotormund's position, so tied up in himself, reminds me of the line about Ferdinand in The Tempest, who is on the seashore with his body in that sad knot. And it just is very much the condition that Theotormund is in there. Speaking of the graphic novel, there's something coming up on the title page that I find very much belongs for me, and that would fit right into that genre. So here we are with the title page. Louisa. That's a hand up. Oh. We can't hear you, Louisa. You need to unmute.
Sorry. I was wondering, you see you've got the numbers 1 and 2 at the top. So clearly in this copy, the frontispiece was put after the title page. And so Bromian is actually looking at the figure coming out of the frontispiece in the middle, in the foreground. And it's also in a couple of copies, the last plate. So it actually moves around this image and it works as an independent plate as well as a frontispiece, which is quite, makes it quite different depending on where you place it.
You're absolutely right, Louisa, about the numbering. And interestingly, this is the way it's presented, I think, on the Blake archive and in various books. But the numbering is clearly that that way. Yeah. Two hands up. Philip.
I'd like to hear people speculate on their reading of the phrase, the eye sees more than the heart knows.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric.
Funnily enough, I was going to mention exactly the same thing. Often in Blake, he would have turned it around, that sentence, and said that the heart knows more than the eye can see.
Yeah.
Typical Blake to do it, to turn it around, isn't it? Make it contrary to, I would say it was the more usual for Blake to have it the other way around.
Yeah, there's even been conjecture that he actually mixed it up in engraving it, but I think I would dismiss that one. I think that's very unlikely.
So does anybody have any comments about why he's done it like that?
Well, if I may, I've always been interested in Blake as an artist creator and dismayed sometimes by the discrepancy between his words and poems and the image that accompanies them. But I think the eye sees more than the heart knows is a reference to something quite fundamental for Blake's own kind of mind, that he was principally, first of all, someone who worked with his eyes, who created fantasies, images, and they were the prime thing, I think, in his kind of artistry. And I think sometimes he drew things, he made images and pictures that came straight from what we now call his subconscious, and then only later attached a narrative to them.
He talks about a return to sensual enjoyment. Maybe sometimes things come in through the senses, but the processing then takes place. But that line has always intrigued me too. Andy.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this thing in Blake, which is in a number of texts, which is the idea of contraction and expansion of the spirit. And in a sense, you know, when Blake says he sees with the eyes, not through them, that kind of idea, there's a way of reading that says that optimally, you know, if you're seeing the big picture, that's everything the eye is capable of seeing. But in a sense, in most circumstances, the heart sees less than that because it's in a reduced state of awareness or being. So there is a sense, even within Blake, and reading him in a sort of normal way, traditional way of reading Blake, of saying that although he's often disparaging of the mere senses, there's nevertheless a sense of saying that, you know, potentially everything can be seen, everything in nature, you know, can be seen, everything that's there can be seen, but often we don't see everything, so to say, you know.
Absolutely. John.
It's seeing the two plates next to each other like that. It's hard not to think that the IC's motto somehow refers, at least in part, to the eye of God, or whatever we think that is on the frontispiece. And I can't remember. It's been a while since I read Visions of the Daughters of Albion. I can't remember whether there's any hint of salvation or redemption, or whether it's just relentless doom. But if I was going to look for another cosmic eye in the frontispiece, I would say it's the break in the clouds to the right, which looks sort of distinctly redemptive or merciful, perhaps, compared to the baleful, glaring eye on the left.
Yeah. Jennifer, I think, was maybe next.
Yes, I think too, we need to remember that the dramatic quality of these works, and not make the error that all of them are supposed to represent Blake himself and his own thoughts. And I think that much that occurs on the frontispieces and the title pages of these various works is sort of a signal or to clue us in perhaps to the voice that we're hearing, the narratorial voice. So is that the eye sees more than the heart knows, a signal of that different narrator, what perspective they're coming from? Because, you know, I mean, all of his works are just magnificent perspective shifting theater. And of course, the title page says these are the visions of the daughters of Albion. So are we looking at one of those visions? Would one of those daughters, one or more, say this motto, the eye sees more than the heart knows? And are we supposed to discover whether there's truth or falsehood in that as the book goes on?
Yeah, that's excellent. Ramazan.
Since I first saw this, it has been troubling me. I don't know why, but this phrase seems very troubling. The eye sees more than the heart knows. I first thought that it might be something ironical. So Blake might be saying that in a sense that the others think like that, but I don't really believe. So he is making fun of this in a sense. But then I read Harold Bloom's Blake's Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And in that he says that what Blake means here is not the actual bodily eye, but spiritual eye, and the heart is the organic heart. So he's shifting these perspectives. But that doesn't satisfy me at all. I don't know what to think about this phrase. So it is still troubling me.
It is really mysterious, isn't it? I like the phrase so much. Again, that when I was a young man, I put it into a song and performed it with a band. Peter Dodd.
What, for me, the line, the eye sees more, is in the same cartouche under which is the artist's name, William Blake. And for me, as Ramazan points out, it strikes me that Blake is posing a question to the reader, to me. And what is absent is the question mark, but it's a statement by Blake. He signed it, and it's addressed to the reader, and particularly to me. Does the eye see more than the heart knows? Or am I just taking it on face value? Is he making a statement, or am I supposed to ask myself a question? I like the latter.
Stephen, could we have a quick rendition of the song, please?
You really don't want to hear that, John. That really would be nightmarish. Does anybody have any comments on the other figures on the title page? Because I'm obsessed with the figure right above the eye sees more than the heart knows. It just seems to me to be, again, so just like run out of a graphic novel, being pursued by the winged, bearded demon figure. but it's so, as with so much of Blake's work, it's so dynamic, but it's, what do you think? It's the way it's drawn. Yeah, it just looks like something that's come from Marvel world in a very good way. And we have the rainbow. Why the rainbow? That's the sign of the covenant, isn't it? Between God and humanity after the flood, which Blake, it's often read as the flood of the five senses, isn't it? Of part of the process of the fall. But here we have the rainbow, which is again a positive sign. And these small groupings of figures engaged in quite sensual things, some of which have been described as being influenced by Fuseli, the little figures doing their stuff. Eric.
Yes, I was just going to point out the figures who seem to be dancing on the left-hand side. That gives us a sense of joyfulness, which I think has got similar figures in the songs of innocence and experience.
Absolutely.
But would you agree that it's a joyful, dynamic sort of emotion?
I think there's a liberated feel to it, isn't there?
Yes, yeah,
definitely. There's draperies around too on the left hand lower figures. Yeah, Andy.
I was just with that last comment. I suddenly remembered the Blake's vision of the Last Judgment, where on the left hand side there are people rising up, towards God, and on the right hand side they're falling down towards perdition or whatever. And very much here you've got the left hand side, that joyous scene, and on the right you've got that quite baleful looking storm or tempest that's been thrown down.
Yes, it looks like a torrent, doesn't it? Silly. Part of the sea scene, yeah. Are we ready to move on? There is a relationship here, isn't there, with Mary Wollstonecraft and the whole thing of the vindication of the rights of women. And Uthune, I love the fact that she insists on her purity. And that seems so contemporary to me, that it's a state of mind. It's not about the body in terms of violation, or she is pure. She is who she is. It's become very problematic around her statements to Thea Torman and what she would do and encourage him to do. But it's just such a fascinating piece altogether, isn't it? If we've finished up. Oh, there's a hand up, Philip.
Hello. I wonder if it might sound negative, but I'm really interested in the idea of play and what William Blake did. We know that he had a great respect for childhood. I don't think he was just cashing in on a trend in his time when he produced the Songs of Innocence and Experience. I think he was genuinely interested in the state of mind of children and so on. And I think sometimes we torment ourselves too much by trying to find an accurate reading of what Blake has done, either in his words or in his images and so on. And I think sometimes, what Blake did was almost like a Rorschach experiment. He just let his mind go blank and created, images and doodles almost, and then embodied them with meaning. So really, he was kind of psychoanalyzing himself.
I think that's very true in many ways. I think in the postmodern sense, Blake just resists closure, doesn't he? Particularly in the images, and they morph and change, and you can see many things in them. That's why it seemed like this discussion would be interesting in that way, and how much we put of ourselves into it is a whole other issue, isn't it? Peter.
Just very quickly, I was amused by the thought when Eric mentioned women. I wonder what Mr. Blake's frontispiece would have been for John Knox's A Trumpet Blast Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women.
We can only guess.
Well, we can indeed, we can only guess.
Just before we move on, it's been noted that the frontispiece is dark and the title page is light by comparison, and that is without being reductive. That's a pattern I think that one often sees. I'm very interested by the idea, which I wasn't until we decided to do this, of the frontispiece as that sort of threshold, that gateway. I suppose it's obvious in some ways, but it seems to often occupy or be located in a liminal space like the seashore in this case. We just look at the bearded figure that's pursuing on this next page. Oh, back, that's it. Oh, and forward, Ian. That's it. We can see a bearded winged figure between the legs of the figure. Well, this is drawn by Fuseli and engraved by Blake for the text that Tim referred to at the beginning, which is Erasmus Darwin's Botanic Garden. And it does seem, doesn't it, that that winged figure might have informed Blake's sense of the figure that he has pursuing. Any more comments on this, what is a piece of more commercial work by Blake in terms of the engraving of Fuseli's work? Ramazan.
Not sure, but is there any changes Blake made to the original design? Do you have any idea? Because the bearded figures' hand gestures are very Blake. So did he take it up from Fuseli?
That's a really good question. And again, I don't have the art knowledge to be able to answer that one. Perhaps John does.
Yeah, not really. But my presumption is that they were influencing each other for quite some time. So it could have been going both ways. And, you know, maybe Fuseli was as influenced by Blake's sort of beardy Old Testament gods as much as the other way. All I really had to say about this plate was I was unaware of this one until the Tate exhibition. I remember seeing this there, and I know it's not meant to be, but I just think it's really funny. There's something about how sort of realistically rendered the human figure is, and then just with a dog's head on top. And I don't know whether anyone's aware, anyone knows the Daft Punk video where there's the kind of schlubby looking guy in like a hoodie going around, and he's just got like a big dog's prosthetic face. It just kind of reminds me of that.
It's a really odd picture. I was very struck by its oddness the first time I saw it. I had no idea of the context or the artists at that time, but Fuseli and Blake were very tight, weren't they? They were very much in each other's, yeah, they were pals. I like the sistrum, bottom left. Nice little Egyptian detail there. Andy.
Just that the original Fuseli drawing is very light on details. You've got the Anubis and some figure floating around the bottom, but I think everything else Blake interpolated, which as I understand is not something that Fuseli would have let most people do, but because of that relationship, he let Blake run with it basically.
Absolutely. Is everybody aware of the verse that Blake wrote about Fuseli? Do we all know that one?
Tell us.
I really like that one. I try and get it right. It's a notebook thing, I think. But he said, the only man I ever really knew who didn't make me almost want to spew was Fuseli. He was both a Turk and Jew. And so, my Christian friends, how do you do? Which is neat. Peter.
yet again, Blake has got an awful lot into one picture. The dog-headed figure of it that straddles the two banks. A dog-headed headdress was worn by the embalmers and the mummifiers in ancient Egypt, and Anubis was the leader of the god of the dead. So we have, or I have, a river between perhaps life and death. We have the dog-headed god Anubis pointing to the sky, and it's the fertilization of the Nile. And one point, of course, is that Sirius is also referred to as the dog star, and its peculiar helical rising presaged the arising of the Nile. But there's a fertilization, there's a death and a rebirth shown in the picture as well. There's clouds dispelling, and the light is breaking through, and the figure is bathed in light.
That's a lovely bit of extra knowledge there, Peter. I knew we could rely on you. If we're done with that one, we can move on to the next frontispiece. And I've chosen one here with rather extraordinary colouring. Again, until we did this exercise, I'd not picked up on this copy. I associate America, which this is much more with the blue colours. Again, 1793, frontispiece to America. What are we looking at? John.
All I was going to say or ask, maybe someone can clarify. I presume this is a much later colouring job, at least. I don't know when it was printed. It looks like much more like his sort of later much more painterly, sort of luminous style.
I think this is copy M, which puts it quite far down the copy run. But I can't give you the date on that.
And while I'm here, just an observation. Just the massive manacles, goes back to what we saw on Visions of the Daughters of Albion as well, shackled to the floor like that.
Yeah. People associate those sometimes with Urizen, but this doesn't seem like a Urizenic figure in other ways, in terms of the wings and the youthful locks and so on. Eric.
I don't know whether you can see this. Can you see?
Can't
this?
see you, Eric. That's it. Oh, you're off and on. That's it. You're on.
I just noticed it is very similar to this
Urizen
image in Urizen. Yeah.
Yep.
Apart from the head.
Yeah.
The chains around the feet.
I think that's why that conjecture has been made. It's also been identified as possibly Albion's angel, orc. There's a whole gamut of possibilities have been presented for this.
I think loss as well, isn't it? Loss. Loss comes into Urizen, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So I think loss is chained in a number of images.
Yeah.
But again, Blake recycles a lot of his images, doesn't he, and uses them over again with slight variations.
He certainly does, yeah. London turns up in Jerusalem, and well, you can go on with that one. Yeah, there's lots of recontextualization of images, aren't there? John.
Is it a cannon in the front? I don't know whether that's...
It is, isn't it? It's the barrel of a cannon, and that immediately gives us the war theme, along with the fact that the winged figure is sitting in a big gap in the wall. We're in the ruins of war, and then we have the dejected figures.
One of the other things that I was really surprised by at the Big Tate exhibition was how good Blake is at feet. I'm a little bit obsessed with Blakean feet now. And I know from experience that they're bloody impossible to draw. So all the more respect for the man.
He seems to associate the feet with the imagination, doesn't he, in all sorts of places. But you're right about the feet. And there's plenty of feet in the frontispieces, John. So that's a treat with those plates of meat.
Once you start looking for feet, like visually and in the verse as well, they're just everywhere. It's hardly a verse without a foot.
No, feats of imagination. Ramazan.
Well, if you are to compare this to the Eurozone picture, so if we take Northrop Frye's idea of the orc cycle, if this is orc, the Eurozone picture is the orc turning into Eurozone stage, maybe, if we can take it like that.
I take your point, and I've always liked some of the Northrop Frye conjectures, and Blake does write, the hand that crushed the tyrant's head became a tyrant in his stead, which seems to confirm the orc cycle. Philip, and then Jennifer.
Okay, I think I've forgotten what I was going to say, but it was about the feet. I think I read somewhere that because Blake's feet, although they're very interesting, they aren't totally realistic. And I think I read somewhere that it was because of his visual education. You know, the copying plaster casts at art school. That they had this idea of the classical foot, which had the big toe was bigger than the rest. I don't know. Some toes were disproportionate or something like that. I'll be quiet now.
I think that's interesting. Feet are very, very apparent, and they are large, aren't they? Jennifer?
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing what people think of these monuments. And especially you've got the figures on the right who are sitting on that square box-like shape. And I can't make out what's on the box. Is it writing? Are there shapes? I don't know if there are clearer images of that in other versions. Does anyone?
There's definitely classical ornamentations, and they do have architectural names. But again, I'm not so well versed in that. Maybe somebody knows better. There's a triangular ornamentation at the top right there. Is very it's very interesting.
It's called Egg and Dart.
Oh. Philip.
Yes, I was going to say it's called Egg and Dart, but I know that Blake, as part of his work as an engraver and so on, did illustrate lots and lots of books that were to do with what we would now call archaeology and Eastern, even Indian sort of civilizations.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was just checking out the chat there. What about the female figure with the children? Tim?
Well, I was just going to be slightly facetious and say this wonderful coloured version of it. I hope someone will use it one day to advertise lipstick, because the cannon at the bottom is obviously a tube of lipstick. And
Absolutely. Apparently, in the lighter colour versions, there's the a broken sword on the right of the cannon, but we can't see it because of the deep pools of colour. But if you look at the blue, the lighter blue versions, there is clearly a sword hilt that's been broken off. Shall we bring in the title page at this point? Andy, speak to us.
This is a bit wacky, to be honest, but it's never occurred to me before. But any comment I've ever heard on the front piece stand, what I think is the orc figure, simply says that, you know, he's obviously got a dejected and he's got his head down in a sort of defeated posture, which is very, very plausible. But at the same time, it looks a bit like a bird's head to me. It looks like it might have an eye on either side of it, and that is pretty wacky, I know.
It's not.
But yeah, that's how it looks to me looking at it now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought, Andy. And when I saw this copy, I thought, well, has he drawn a bird's head in here instead? So I had exactly that same thought, but it's totally different in the light blue copies, and it's clearly a young person with flowing locks, but it does look like a bird, doesn't it? And with weird sort of, yeah, mandible bits as well, just to confuse the issue. But again, I think these things are all in play, aren't they? John?
I was just thinking about I forget who said it, sorry, about the recycling of images and him returning almost compulsively to certain images. And there were a whole series of images he did, I think, early on in his career of the sieges and war and plagues, and I forget the title of the siege in the wall of the city. Yeah, and these are clearly related to those, aren't they? The images of destruction and warfare.
Absolutely. In fact, if we go to the next slide, Ian.
See, I knew that was coming.
You did. You saw that one coming. And there's the breach, very similar to the one that the winged figure is sitting in.
With a bird.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And various arrangements of the figure. Could we go back, Ian? Oh, back. Yeah. Sorry, I just said back twice. I didn't mean back. So forward again, please. Thank you. Yeah, again, in terms of, I'm getting very interested in this idea of the liminal, that the breach in the wall, you know, we're inside the city and there's the outside of the city. And again, it's a threshold point, which you can see very clearly in the picture that we just saw that he took it from, in terms of the inner and the outer and the entrance. Here, the entrance has been blown apart by a cannon. I find on the title page, I find the woman kissing the corpse a very disturbing image. There's some sense that is she trying to sort of revive him with a kiss or almost mouth to mouth. Okay, shall we move on? We have a quick look at the breach, Ian, again. I'm wondering at this point if anybody has brought their favourite frontispiece with them. There was an invitation to do that, and we certainly wouldn't want to deny that possibility.
Stephen, I think Ninka wanted to ask a question. Maybe she doesn't have a symbol.
Okay. Ninka, lovely. Can you unmute, please?
As to the previous picture, I just wondered if anybody could tell me, yes, this one, what is represented at the left lower bottom
of the frontispiece, Ninka?
Yes.
It's a cannon. It's the yeah, it's the muzzle of a cannon.
And Why?
Because it's the American War of Independence, I imagine, and these are the casualties of war. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, since I'm on here, another question. I see 3 legs to the right, and I can identify the 2 legs from the woman, but there's another leg, and I can't see where it goes.
On the frontispiece, is that the child that's leaning over the, presumably the mother's lap?
Ah, okay. Yes, yes.
Yeah, she's got 2 children, but she seems in such a state of sort of shock and dejection.
Yes.
She's not really focused on them. She's holding them, but she's focused on the middle distance in a very disturbing way. It's a brilliant portrayal of trauma, really, isn't it?
Well, thank you, but still, I think that the proportion of the legs to the child's head are a little disproportionate, but
I think we've got two children there, one leaning into the mother's lap from the right, and one she's holding, or sort of is nestled into her arms.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Andy?
Just about the canon, since Ninka asked, it's not quite to scale, but very plausibly where Orc is sitting, that isn't necessarily a hole that's been blown in the wall. It looks very much like a crenellation where you would have a cannon mounted pointing outwards from a defensive wall. So it looks like a cannon was probably situated there.
I think it's a bit jagged on the right there.
On the right, it might have taken a blow, but on the left, it isn't jagged. And while I'm here, in the next picture, the one of the city wall, the breach in the city wall, look at that chap on the left with the big bird's head. I just want to mention that. And it looks a bit like, since we mentioned the bird's head earlier, but also he looks like a figure that always really freaked me out in Blake, which is in Jerusalem, where there's a character that looks like he's got a chicken's head, but apparently it's Garuda. Where Blake had been looking at pictures of, Indian gods, there's the god Garuda who had a head very much like that. So so I wonder if Garuda has come into this and the previous image as well.
Yeah, the bird is very odd, isn't it? It's Urizen's associated with eagles as well, isn't he? Actually. That figure in Jerusalem always makes me think of Abraxas a bit, the Gnostic god, but he hasn't got a human body. Oh dear, yeah. Good, John.
Could we look at the previous one, the page after the frontispiece? Yeah, I just had a look at the more the sort of uncoloured version that most of us are probably more used to check, and there's at least 2 other bodies underneath the body she's kissing.
Yes.
Just to add to so it's literally like a pile of corpses.
I can see that because you can see like sort of head sticking out.
The one on the right is a bit more obvious, but there's like another one even under the head end of the main corpse.
Yes, it's like a whole family potentially, or just
maybe
a pile of dead troops. And the figures above, they've been very nicely commented on. There's what we and he are all doing on the left. There's reading going on, and I think Erdmann refers to the child helper, as the page turning girl. That's her role. And prophecy on the other side with the very gestural thing going on. So it's again a very a very self-referential title page perhaps, but it goes in so many directions at once, doesn't it, really? Well, we can either move on to another work, or we can, as I say, if anybody's got one they want to share. Peter.
Yes, just one point. From the bottom left corner, sweeping past the prone figure in white, I see a thumb raised. Thumbs are going up, are they? Is it a thumb? Does anybody else see a thumb? It's
Are
pointing
you on the title page, Peter?
on the title page. It's pointing to the tip of the thumb. To me, is pointing to the letter E, and the thumb is about to raise up. Blake is making a prophecy here that America may have lost people, may have lost life, may have lost something, but there is something coming through. The thumb is going up. And also, just to point on the frontispiece, the cannon is not in its carriage. It's been thrown on the floor.
Yeah. Is the war over, Peter?
I cannot make that prophecy, Stephen.
Sure you can. Okay, shall we move on? Oh, a familiar one, and the one that graced my teenage bedroom's wall. And one of Blake's very popular pieces. Ramazan.
This was my second choice as my favorite because I thought lots of people would choose this. So I picked Visions of the Daughters of Albion. And Peter's thumb image, I can see it here as picking up the sun. Someone is pinching or holding the sun in between a thumb and a finger. I can see the fingernail. I can see the thumb holding up. So what fascinates me in this one is it's all about constrictions while creating the universe, while creating the world. Urizen is himself constricted. He has a constricted body in a very small orb, which looks like the eye of the god and the Daughters of Albion. Mm-hmm. And he is being pinched in thumbs, just like he's holding the compasses. So it's all about constriction, while Blake is all about expansion. So it's a very contradictory piece.
I think your eye sees a great deal, Ramazan, and your heart knows a hell of a lot. That's very interesting. Yeah, I can see what you see now you've said it. John.
I just wanted to respond to what Ramazan said. I think that's brilliant. I've never seen that before, but once you see that, it's almost like emphasizing Urizen perhaps in his demiurgic nature, that he thinks he's creating the universe and there's a bigger god pinch coming to squash him.
Yes, it shows his limitations. It reminds me of the story of Monkey and Buddha, where Monkey flies to the end of the earth because he says he's greater than Buddha, and he wheezes on Buddha's, he wheezes on the pillars at the end of the earth. I nearly blew the story there to prove he's been there. When he gets back, he says to Buddha, I've been to the end of the earth, and Buddha opens his hand and 5 fingers, and Monkey can smell the trace of his own wee on one of the fingers. It's very like that. There's the limitations of Urizen. Peter.
Generally, the drawing instrument that Urizen holds are referred to as compasses. And when I was at school, they also referred to these things as dividers.
Yes.
And the usage of a divider in a creative, presumably a creative context, is just, and for me, yet another wonderful example of the sheer psychological penetrative brilliance of Blake.
Divided we fall, Peter?
Heard that somewhere before.
Yeah. Philip?
For me, and I think for lots of other people, I agree, yeah, they're dividers, but that was exactly the sort of thing that Blake really detested, counting things and dividing things and mathematical constructions and rigid order and so on. So I think really he's just, as I said before, he just has images that come out of his mind, and he doesn't know what they mean at first, but then, it's all part of the magic of William Blake.
Absolutely, yeah. And he has worked this one very consciously in some ways, I think, although who knows with Blake, in as much as I understand it, the proportions are mathematically, geometrically very well worked out. The length of the compass or divider is exactly the distance between his knees, and his right knee is on the radius of the circumference and so on. So he's circumscribed by his own geometry, effectively. He becomes what he's creating.
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't know if this is an anachronistic way of looking at this, but it always reminds me of an egg, either an unfertilized egg or an egg being fertilized. And the other thing that just intrigues me about so many of Blake's human figures is the way that he extends them into impossible bodily contortions. And I think those are significant. I don't know what really to make of it here, except that arm that's being extended. It's like, where is his shoulder? And is that an impossibly long arm? And where's the other arm, by the way? And, those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Those parts of his body are completely obscured. This is another threshold, isn't it, too, as he reaches into the void. It's another entrance into something which is appearing before us, or is about to. But he is appears to be emerging from that egg, but it's almost like a disc behind him. There's a lot of sort of optical games go on in terms of where things are in the dimension. Not quite like Escher, but there's a taste of that, I think, sometimes in Blake. Andy.
Oh, yeah, I was listening to what Peter said about dividers and compasses. And I think when I've read about this, I've always just sort of taken it for granted. Yeah, dividers, they limit, and it's all about measurement and division and regulation and things like that. But I wonder now, I'm thinking, what do people actually use those dividers for? I remember when I was at school, you would use them to measure the length of something. So you would set your dividers up to be, say if an inch, if you had an inch a mile map, you'd set your dividers up an inch, and then you would follow the coastline round, which isn't really constraining something, it's a saying something. And so when I think of compasses, I think of encompassing and circles, drawing a circle. That's the classic use of the compass. And the one thing that strikes me about that there is that the Ancient of Days head and his right leg form a sort of compass, with his head at the center of that sun and his right leg reaching out to the radius, such that if you were to rotate it, it would describe precisely what is encompassing him.
Absolutely, yeah. He's englobed is a Blake word, isn't it? Very much so. And again, we have a great deal of darkness in this frontispiece. He's subject to the wind that blows his beard and hair. That's often commented on it. Yeah, he is subject, not necessarily controlling everything. Shall we add in the title page at this point? And again, we see that dark frontispiece light title page effect and a very startlingly different image. Peter Dodd.
Yeah, just going back to the frontispiece again, there's a line from a little known English writer called Welsh writer called Thomas Lovell Beddoes, which for me always applies to this picture of Horizon, which is, and I will burst damnation's iron egg, my tomb, and come half damned ere they make lightning of my soul. And the picture, for me, wonderfully couples with that particular text.
I've forgotten about Beddoes, Peter. Thank you for reminding me. I haven't thought about him for years. Oh.
Could you share that in the chat, that source?
Can you share that in the chat, Peter, was the request, the Thomas Love Beddoes source. I always thought it's nice to have Love as a middle name. Talika. Talika, if you'd like to.
I've unmuted myself. Hi, I'm very sorry for being so late. But just a couple of observations of the picture. When I first see it, it always reminds me of the Soviet Union, the emblem on the Soviet Union flag. Sorry, there I am.
Right.
And also as though it's within a magnifying glass, and which kind of magnifies that central image. And I just wondered if anyone else saw the same thing at all.
It certainly looks like he's within that, again, within that circle of the magnifying glass, or even in the petri dish, or the egg, which has been referred to. He reaches out of a sort of confinement, out of a sort of womb, doesn't he?
And the Soviet, that sort of semicircle, because it sort of, you know, you think it's a circle, but it's not really. It's got that flame on one side.
Ah, so it's a crescent.
Yes. So, and I just wondered what the significance or what he meant by that. It's an illusion, maybe, like Leonardo's, you know, just you think it's something, but it's not.
That's a very interesting observation, because again, the mind fills in the gaps sometimes, doesn't it, and completes the circle, and maybe that's a Eurozenic habit of mind closure.
Yeah, so that's it really. Those are my 2 cents worth.
Thank you very much, Talika. That's great. Tim.
Oh, Ninka was indicating again.
Oh. Ah, Ninka, are you indicating?
Yes, I have another. Wait a minute. Can we just return to the?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Now, I see on the title page a snake curling, curling, curling. But at the end, it seems that the curling gets bigger and bigger, where you would expect that it would get smaller and smaller. So this does not, well, agree with my perception of natural history. Can anybody perhaps explain?
The snake is coiling upwards, isn't he? Or she. Perhaps from the sort of stronger base, but you're right, it's, yeah. That's a very interesting observation. I know that the circle of the bottom coil is approximately the same as the disc or crescent, as perhaps we've just been asked to think about it, of the Eurozenic figure.
Well, it must express something very definite, I think. Because otherwise, well, I've never met a snake in my life, but I would think that the tail then would be petering out, sort of.
Yeah, I know what you mean, Inka. Tim.
Okay, thank you.
It's a tiny point of typography, but what I find most distressing about the title page is the way he's using a lowercase e. He simply couldn't resist turning an e into a snake, but having a lowercase e as the first letter just indicates what you're expecting.
Thank you. Yes.
I think, yeah, your questioning is, I think, a really interesting one. It's not a natural sort of coiling, is it? In many ways. John.
Looking at the snake, it looks to me like the big coil at the bottom is like a double coil. I don't know whether that's just the way I'm looking at it. Like it's making almost a cube.
Oh yes,
cube.
yes.
So it makes it look like when you see like a python wrapping around someone's neck or something, and it looks scarily sort of muscular. But I also love the way, again, a bit like what Tim's saying about being very playful with the snake imagery. And it kind of goes back to thinking about him as a designer and maybe even a proto-graphic novelist. The way he's got the snake going off the page, and then you have to imagine it curling back round and the tiny tip of the tail coming back onto the page at the bottom.
Absolutely.
It's quite sort of witty almost.
Yeah. The contrast between frontispiece and title page here is extreme, isn't it? Between the light, the dark and the light. The snake is going upwards. Urizen, or the demiurge, his focus is all downwards. There's a line, I don't want to get into the closure, but there's a line in the poem, thought changed the infinite into a serpent, which
okay.
Yeah,
thank
quite
you.
handy.
Change the infinite into a circle.
Yeah, thought, actually, the actual quotes, thought changed the infinite to a serpent. Yeah, which seems to work across the two in terms of the limitations of the Eurozenic constrictions, and thought is changed into the serpent, which we see there. But it's orc, isn't it, as well, though, as a counterforce.
Of course, we all know the image of the snake in a circle, curling its head on its tail, which is an image of, I think, eternity. But here, things are reversed, it seems.
Yeah. Ramazan?
Yeah, I was going to talk about thought changed infinite into a serpent, because Blake here is criticizing the idea of the Ouroboros, the snake that bites its own tail, because you are constricting it again. He believes infinite to be infinite, but people think of it as a circle which goes on and on and on. So he believes that our perception, limited perceptions, try to limit the infinite. While doing that, we fear the infinite. Well, we should be desiring the infinite. So the serpent is an image of fear for many, but it should be the idea of an infinite thing that can expand in itself. And here, the snake is not whole. We don't see all of the snake. Half of it is out the page. So we don't know how long it is. We don't know how many other coils it has. So we cannot just perceive all of the infinite. I think that's brilliant.
That's a lovely comment. Tulika.
Following on from what this person just said, but the circles are also like a window onto the background. So thought changed the infinite, which is everything, into these little windows that we have onto onto reality. So I'm not very familiar with Zoom, but you know, these circles, that we're looking through those circles, the viewer, and that mirrors the crescent shape. So we're seeing that figure, or if it's supposed to be, I don't know what it's supposed to be, but seeing through one of these circles, this little prism onto our idea of something, and that man represents maybe God or whoever. It's condensing the infinite, the totality, into this little magnifying way of looking at things. Not sure if I'm making much sense. But...
Well, I think you are. I mean, there's windows on the, there's a major window on the frontispiece, and there's several windows. I mean, they inevitably are windows that we're looking through to the landscape on the title page. Traditionally, we're looking at sort of in an orthodox way, creation and fall, aren't we, in terms of Eden and the serpent. But Blake is so much more rich and complex than those ideas as a simple timeline of theological history. I'm conscious of time here, but I have two more hands raised here. Peter and then Andy.
Thank you. It's a matter of astonishment for me that Blake has engraved and written this book in the time of upheaval in Europe, and the age of reason was rising, perhaps reflected in the use of divided and compasses or circumscribing a condition. But there's the serpentine, the serpent, which has a serpentine shape and a serpentine python movement of crushing and squashing, and the serpentine tendrils, or the serpentine shape, emanates from the top of the first letter E in Europe. And what happens for me is that when I look at the title page, I see tendrils, and then slowly the text goes into, I call it uppercase italic, which is probably incorrect, but it's getting less loving and less serpentine and fluid, and it's getting harder to prophecy, which is in capital, I call them capital letters, they're probably not, but I don't know what title I put to them. But it moves from a loving E and a loving U and R into the hard world of the uppercase lettering.
Yes, and it's far more fertile on the left-hand side, isn't it? With your
I'm sorry.
Far more fertile, it's sprouting vegetation on the left-hand side, and more regimented as it goes into your capitals. Andy.
Yeah, I might only be violently agreeing with Ramazan and I think John, but having listened to what they said, I'm reminded of a record I was involved in making as a musician with, well, as it happens, some an avant-garde Siberian shaman group.
Oh, that one.
It was called, but we called, the album was, I programmed it with computers to take their music and recombine it an infinite number of ways. So you could listen to this record forever and it would never repeat itself. So the album was called Infinity, but for the cover, we had the symbol for infinity, the figure 8 on its side, but cropped at both sides so that you couldn't actually capture infinity. And now that I've heard Ramazan speak, that's what I see here with the serpent's tail and the cropping.
We've got to hear this album. They had a difficult third album, Andy, didn't they? The eye sees more than the heart knows, that one. Good. Well, Tim, we've reached our time. So
I'd like to thank everyone, especially Ian Frampton for his technical support and Stephen Pritchard for his work on this. We haven't reached the end of these frontispieces, But I think just looking at one piece of Blake opens up into infinity. It's a great privilege to hear so many contributions and so many insights into these images and texts. And so I'm now going to close the meeting and thank everyone for contributing and for attending today. Thank you.
Tim, just before you do, Tim, could we just remind everyone of the next event? Because I think Louisa is hosting or is leading the next event, isn't she? I can't quite remember the date.
May the 18th.
May the 18th.
Louisa, would you like to say a few words about the Dante event? Is Louisa with us?
She might have gone, sorry.
Yeah, I think she has. Yeah.
It's
might have done.
over.
Well, anyway, as you all know, this year marks the 700th anniversary of the death of Dante, and we're doing a special event on Blake's illustrations to Dante, and it will be led by Louisa Calais, an expert on this subject. And that we will share through new media and through our next newsletter, the May newsletter. So thank you, John, for reminding me to remind everyone that will be our next event. So with that, I'm going to wish everyone good night, and we hope to see you in May.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Good night.
All right.